Pay attention to the man with a blood wound, cleaning his gun. His name is Jim Breener. In the next couple of minutes, we'll be uncovering the crime he committed with the gun. Now turn your attention to this guy. His name is Dylan Rounds, a young farmer who we will soon discover how he went missing and what would turn out to be the coldest murder case in Utah. It began in one of the loneliest corners of America, a stretch of desert so vast and silent it almost swallows sound. No houses, no traffic, just wind, dirt, and the hum of power lines that seem to go nowhere. On a map, the place barely registers. Lucin, Utah, a ghost town surrounded by miles of emptiness. But for 19-year-old Dylan Rounds, this was home. In the early hours of May 28, 2022, Dylan vanished. His phone went dead. His truck was found mysteriously cleaned. And his boots, the boots he wore every day, were discovered tossed carelessly behind a dirt mound near his grain shed. It didn't look like an accident. It looked like someone wanted Dylan gone. Over the following days, what began as a missing person case would unravel into one of the most disturbing rural mysteries Utah has ever seen. A case involving secrecy, violence, and a man with a past darker than anyone knew. A mother's relentless search, a suspect with a history of rage, and a desert that seemed determined to keep its secret buried. This is the story of Dylan Rounds, and how a young farmer's dream turned into a chilling nightmare on the edge of nowhere. To understand what happened to Dylan Rounds, you first have to understand the kind of person he was, and the kind of place he chose to call home. But before we get into who Dylan was and the real story to what happened to him, do us a favor to like this story and subscribe to this channel to help spread stories like this, and also share to someone you think would like to hear the story of Dylan Rounds. Dylan was born on August 1st, 2002, and raised between Idaho and Utah. He grew up in a close-knit family that valued hard work, honesty, and self-reliance, the kind of values that run deep in rural America. From a young age, Dylan stood out. He wasn't interested in social media, city life, or the distractions most teenagers chase. His passion was the land. By 16, he could run heavy machinery better than men twice his age. He worked long hours on family farms, learning to fix tractors, manage irrigation, and operate combines. He wasn't afraid of solitude. In fact, he thrived on it. While most young adults were figuring out what they wanted to do with their lives, Dylan already knew. He wanted to farm, full-time on his own land with his own hands. In 2021, Dylan made that dream a reality. He leased a small piece of farmland in Lucin, Utah, a forgotten community about 200 miles northwest of Salt Lake City. Once a stop along the historic Transcontinental Railroad, Lucin had long been abandoned. By the time Dylan moved there, it was more a ghost town than a functioning community. There were no paved roads, no grocery stores, no power grid. The nearest town with basic services was over half an hour away. Cell service was spotty. Temperatures could swing wildly. Scorching hot days, freezing nights. It was an environment that would have broken most people. But not Dylan. He set up a small camper trailer on the property, parked next to an old grain shed, and started working the soil. He installed irrigation lines, fixed rusted equipment, and planted his first major crop, wheat. His family and friends say he was proud, determined, and focused. One friend later told reporters, "Dylan didn't care about being rich. He just wanted to make something grow. That was his whole world." Still, Lucin wasn't exactly a safe place. A few people still drifted through the area. Ranch hands, drifters, and older men living off-grid. The sense of isolation, combined with the remoteness, could make anyone uneasy. Over time, Dylan's family began noticing things that worried them. He'd call his mom, Candace Cooley, and mention that strangers were hanging around his property. One incident stood out. Dylan said an older man had walked barefoot down the road toward his camper in the middle of the night. Another time, he mentioned someone had asked for a ride and seemed off. Candace would later recall in interviews that Dylan wasn't the type to scare easily. So when he said something felt wrong, she paid attention. In the weeks leading up to his disappearance, that feeling only grew stronger. The spring of 2022 was supposed to be a high point in Dylan's young career. His wheat crop was nearly ready, and he was finally seeing the results of months of backbreaking work. But behind that optimism, something dark was taking shape. Unbeknownst to Dylan, one of his nearby neighbors, a man named James Brenner, had a history of violence. Brenner was in his late 50s, a known drifter with a long criminal record. He'd been living illegally in a trailer on a friend's property just a few miles from Dylan's farm. Locals described him as a loner with a short temper. He'd worked odd jobs for nearby ranchers, often helping with maintenance or equipment repairs, but he also had a reputation for being unstable. At times, he carried firearms and was known to get angry easily. Still, Dylan, always trusting and polite, never saw him as a threat. He occasionally helped Brenner with small tasks and even let him borrow tools. To most outsiders, it seemed like a small community looking out for one another. But beneath that quiet cooperation, there were tensions. Around this time, another man, Chase Venstra, entered the picture. Venstra was a transient, a man Dylan had reportedly given a ride to not long before he went missing. Chase had a criminal past, including theft and assault. For a brief period, he became another name in a growing list of people who had crossed paths with Dylan before his disappearance. In hindsight, it's easy to see how the isolation, the cast of rough characters, and the lack of oversight created a dangerous environment. But at the time, Dylan believed he was safe, focused solely on his land and his work. His parents later said that Dylan's optimism was one of his best qualities, but also, perhaps, his most tragic. By the final week of May 2022, Dylan's days followed a familiar rhythm. He worked the farm, called his family, and prepared for harvest. Nothing seemed out of place, until the morning he called his grandmother to tell her it was raining. That call would be the last time anyone ever heard his voice. On the morning of Saturday, May 28, 2022, the weather over Lucin was turning quickly. Heavy gray clouds were rolling in across the salt flats, carrying a desert rain that could turn dirt roads into mud in a matter of minutes. At around 6:40 a.m., Dylan Rounds called his grandmother. He told her it had started to rain, and he needed to move his truck, the seed truck he used for his farm, to prevent the grain inside from getting wet. It was a short, practical call, the kind you'd expect from a young man in the middle of his workday. He promised to call her back later. He never did. That phone call was the last known contact anyone had with Dylan Rounds. When his grandmother and mother didn't hear from him again, they weren't immediately alarmed. Out in Lucin, phone service was unpredictable. A call could drop for hours or days. But by Sunday, when Dylan still hadn't checked in, concern turned into panic. His mother, Candace Cooley, drove from Idaho to Utah the next morning, covering hundreds of miles through the empty desert. She knew something was wrong. Dylan was responsible, consistent, and always in touch. When she reached his property, the first thing she saw was his pickup truck parked near the grain shed. It looked out of place, cleaner than it should have been after a storm. Dylan's mother immediately noticed that the truck appeared power-washed, as though someone had gone out of their way to remove dirt or mud. Inside, the seat position had been changed, pushed forward, which didn't make sense for Dylan's tall frame. Even stranger, the key fob, something Dylan always kept on him, was found inside the truck, wedged between the seats. To Candace, it felt wrong. Dylan never left his keys in the truck, and he never left his farm without letting someone know. Outside, near a dirt mound behind the shed, she made another discovery that would set off the entire investigation: Dylan's boots. They were tossed on the ground, muddy, and one had a dark stain that didn't look like dirt. Later testing would confirm what Candace feared most. The stain was blood, and it was Dylan's. This wasn't a disappearance. It was a crime scene. When she called law enforcement, the Box Elder County Sheriff's Office responded, but the initial handling of the scene would later become a point of frustration for Dylan's family. Deputies seemed hesitant to treat it as foul play. They conducted basic checks, asked questions, and took statements, but according to the family, they didn't secure the area properly. In those critical first hours, evidence may have been lost. Footprints, tire tracks, even traces that could have pointed directly to a suspect. As the search intensified, family members and volunteers joined forces. They used ATVs, drones, and search dogs to comb through the rugged desert terrain, battling heat during the day and freezing temperatures at night. There were no signs of Dylan. His camper trailer looked untouched. His wallet, guns, and phone were missing. But what truly baffled investigators was how deliberate everything appeared, as if someone had carefully erased their tracks. For days, teams scoured the area for clues. They searched nearby mines, drainage ditches, and abandoned structures. Nothing. Then came the first real lead. A witness, who lived several miles from Dylan's property, told deputies that an older man named Jim Brenner had been seen in the area around the time Dylan vanished. Brenner lived alone in a nearby trailer on a friend's land. The witness described Brenner as off, volatile, armed, and quick to anger. When deputies visited him, he seemed nervous, guarded, and defensive. They also learned that another man, Chase Venstra, had been spotted walking barefoot down the same road near Dylan's property just days earlier, disoriented and behaving erratically. Dylan himself had mentioned the encounter to his family, saying Venstra had made him uncomfortable. Both names became central to the case. Over the following week, search teams expanded their efforts. They followed phone pings, analyzed tire marks, and checked nearby wells and ponds. Still, nothing pointed definitively to where Dylan might be. But one piece of evidence, subtle yet crucial, would later help prosecutors build their case. Investigators found a .22 caliber shell casing near the area where Dylan's boots were discovered. It wasn't much on its own. But later, when they searched Brenner's trailer, they would find a firearm that matched that caliber, and ballistics would reveal a match. That connection would eventually prove vital, but at the time, it was just one more thread in a tangled web of uncertainty. For Dylan's family, the days blurred together, hope fading with every empty search. The desert seemed endless, stretching out like an ocean of dust and silence. Each night, Candace Cooley and volunteers returned exhausted, only to wake up and do it again. They were determined not to leave without answers. What they didn't know was that the truth and the man responsible were closer than they could have imagined. Just a few miles away, in a small, rusted trailer, the person who knew exactly what had happened to Dylan Rounds was sitting quietly, watching the search unfold. And his name was James Brenner. The search for Dylan Rounds quickly grew into one of the most exhaustive missing person investigations in Utah's history. As word spread across social media, volunteer search groups arrived from neighboring states. People brought drones, horses, and off-road vehicles to scour the vast desert. But Lucin is not a place that gives up secrets easily. There are no security cameras, no streetlights, and no neighbors within shouting distance. It's a ghost town surrounded by silence, a perfect place for something dark to happen, unseen. In the first few days, the Box Elder County Sheriff's Office led the effort, supported by the FBI and Weber County investigators. They retraced Dylan's movements, analyzing his phone data and financial records, while family members conducted independent searches, convinced that law enforcement wasn't moving fast enough. Then, a small but significant clue surfaced. Investigators were able to access Dylan's Google account and found that his cell phone had last pinged near his property the morning he vanished, close to where his boots had been discovered. That single ping helped narrow the search grid, and a few days later, a burnt cell phone was located in the desert, partially destroyed but still containing recoverable data. Forensic technicians carefully examined the device, hoping it would reveal what happened in those final moments. And it did. Hidden deep within the phone's cache data was a single video clip, only a few seconds long, that would ultimately break the case wide open. The footage showed a man's legs and jeans splattered with blood. The voice in the background was unmistakably Dylan's. And the man holding the phone, appearing calm, almost mechanical, was James Brenner. It was the final, silent witness to a murder. James Brenner, 59 years old, was a drifter, a man with a long, violent past. He had a reputation among locals as unpredictable and angry. His criminal record stretched back decades, including assault, firearms charges, and attempted murder. He was known to live alone in an old trailer, surrounded by rusting vehicles and scrap metal, about 5 miles from Dylan's farm. He worked odd jobs, occasionally helping neighbors with machinery or animals, and sometimes worked alongside Dylan during planting season. Investigators later learned that Brenner and Dylan had a tense relationship. Brenner often borrowed tools and equipment, but rarely returned them. Dylan, known for being responsible and disciplined, reportedly grew frustrated with Brenner's erratic behavior. Neighbors described Brenner as the kind of man you don't want to cross. After the discovery of the blood-stained boots, police began closing in. They obtained a search warrant for Brenner's trailer and nearby sheds. Inside, they found multiple firearms, including a .22 caliber rifle. That weapon would become a key piece of evidence when forensic testing later linked it to the shell casing found near Dylan's boots. But at the time, detectives didn't yet have enough to charge him with murder. They arrested Brenner instead on firearms violations. As a convicted felon, he wasn't allowed to possess guns at all. While Brenner was being held in custody, FBI agents continued processing evidence from the phone and surrounding property. They also recovered spent ammunition, bloody rags, and cleaning supplies, suggesting that an attempt had been made to conceal a violent act. As pressure mounted, witnesses came forward describing strange behavior from Brenner in the days after Dylan vanished. One local ranch hand recalled that Brenner had suddenly asked him to hide several guns for safekeeping. Another said Brenner seemed unusually nervous, talking in circles and muttering about people trying to frame him. And perhaps most tellingly, investigators discovered fresh rake marks and disturbed soil near an area behind Brenner's trailer, though nobody was found at the time. Meanwhile, Dylan's family grew increasingly vocal, accusing the Box Elder County Sheriff's Office of moving too slowly. Candace Cooley, his mother, held press conferences and interviews, demanding transparency and urging the FBI to take full control. She wasn't just fighting for justice. She was fighting to keep her son's story alive. The family organized independent searches, raised reward money, and brought in private investigators who used advanced drone imaging and radar to analyze possible burial sites. Despite the tension, the combined persistence of law enforcement and Dylan's loved ones began to pay off. In early 2023, after months of forensic work, investigators confirmed what the family had long feared. The blood found on Dylan's boots was a match to his DNA. The firearm from Brenner's trailer matched the shell casing found near the boots. And the video evidence from Dylan's phone, showing Brenner covered in blood, was damning. Prosecutors believed the sequence of events went something like this. On May 28, 2022, Dylan likely confronted Brenner about something, possibly a dispute over tools or property boundaries. An argument escalated. Brenner, already known for his violent temper, grabbed his .22 rifle and shot Dylan. Panicked, he hid the body, cleaned up the scene, and tried to destroy Dylan's phone, not realizing the device had already recorded the evidence that would later seal his fate. Even without a body, the digital, physical, and forensic evidence painted a clear picture. In March 2023, James Brenner was officially charged with aggravated murder and desecration of a human body. But the story didn't end there. For months after the charges were filed, search teams still scoured the desert for one thing Dylan's family refused to give up on: his remains. Candace Cooley said in an interview, "We won't stop until we bring Dylan home." And in April 2024, nearly 2 years after his disappearance, their search finally ended. Acting on new information, investigators located human remains in a remote area near Lucin, consistent with where Brenner had been living. DNA testing confirmed it was Dylan Rounds. The discovery gave the family a measure of peace, but it also solidified the full scope of what had been lost. The truth was now undeniable. Dylan had been murdered by a man he knew, trusted, and once worked alongside. And the desert that had swallowed him for nearly 2 years had finally given him back. The legal proceedings against James Brenner began in late 2024, drawing widespread attention across Utah and the country. Courtrooms were packed, reporters lined the hallways, and Dylan's family sat in silent rows, holding tightly to one another. From the start, the prosecution painted a vivid, unflinching portrait of a man whose anger and violence had escalated to murder. They presented the video from Dylan's phone, forensic reports linking Brenner's rifle to the shell casings, blood evidence, and witness testimonies about Brenner's erratic behavior in the weeks following Dylan's disappearance. In his defense, Brenner's attorney argued that without a body, the case was circumstantial. He claimed the evidence had been misinterpreted, portraying Brenner as a victim of circumstance rather than a perpetrator of murder. But the court found the argument unconvincing. The combination of digital evidence, forensic science, and witness statements created a compelling narrative. Brenner had acted alone, violently, and deliberately. The trial lasted several weeks. Emotionally charged testimony brought the courtroom to tears. Dylan's mother, Candace Cooley, spoke softly but with steel, recounting the moment she realized her son had vanished forever. "I remember the day he didn't come home," she said, her voice breaking. "I knew something was wrong, and for nearly 2 years we searched, hoping, praying, fearing the worst. We never stopped. We still won't stop." Other witnesses described Brenner's aggressive nature, his threats toward neighbors, and his attempts to cover up the crime, all painting a chilling image of premeditation and malice. In the end, the jury unanimously found James Brenner guilty of first-degree murder and desecration of a human body. The sentencing followed shortly after, life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring Brenner would never again pose a threat to anyone else. For Dylan's family, the verdict brought a measure of justice, but not healing. Candace Cooley said afterward, "Justice doesn't bring him back, but it reminds us that the truth matters, and that his life mattered." The community, too, was shaken. Lucin, a town already small and isolated, grappled with the horror that one of their own could commit such a violent act. Neighbors and local leaders emphasized the need for vigilance, awareness, and community support, highlighting how even the safest, quietest areas are not immune to tragedy. Local law enforcement also took stock of the case. The investigation had exposed gaps in how missing person reports are handled in rural areas, leading to policy changes for faster mobilization, better coordination with federal agencies, and improved technology use for tracking and evidence recovery. The case also sparked a national conversation about digital evidence in violent crimes. Dylan's phone, recording just a few seconds of video, had become a critical piece of proof that ultimately uncovered the truth. Experts noted how technology, combined with determined investigative work, could compensate for the lack of traditional evidence in modern criminal cases. For the Cooley family, Dylan's memory is now honored through scholarships, community events, and public awareness campaigns. Every year, on the anniversary of his disappearance, friends and neighbors gather near his farm to remember the young man who had been taken too soon. And while the desert may have once swallowed Dylan, it can never erase the impact of his life, the persistence of his family, or the lessons learned from his tragic death. The story of Dylan Cooley is a stark reminder that even in the quietest corners of the country, darkness can creep in unnoticed. A young life full of promise, abruptly cut short, leaves ripples that stretch far beyond a single family or town. As we reflect on the events, it becomes clear that the tragedy was not inevitable. It was shaped by choices, by violence, secrecy, and the consequences of unchecked aggression. And yet, in the face of such loss, the human spirit perseveres. Dylan's family, friends, and community refused to let his disappearance be forgotten. Their resilience and determination were central to uncovering the truth. This case also highlights the evolving nature of criminal investigations. A single video clip, a meticulous forensic analysis, and tireless detective work converged to shine light on what was hidden for nearly 2 years. It is a testament to the power of modern investigative methods, but also to the patience and persistence of those committed to justice. For those watching, Dylan's story may evoke fear, sorrow, or disbelief, but it also challenges us to pay attention, to care for our neighbors, and to support the systems, legal, social, and technological, that keep communities safe. Dylan's memory lives on not just in his family's hearts, but in every action taken to prevent similar tragedies. Scholarships in his name, public awareness campaigns, and community programs serve as living reminders of a life lost too soon, but not forgotten. In the end, the lessons are clear. Evil can strike anywhere, but truth, perseverance, and community can prevail. While we cannot undo the past, we can honor those taken from us by learning, remembering, and acting. As you close your eyes tonight, or walk through your own neighborhood, consider the fragile line between normalcy and tragedy. The story of Dylan coolly reminds us that vigilance, compassion, and determination are never wasted. Because even in the face of profound loss, humanity has the power to seek justice, to uncover truth, and to ensure that every life, no matter how briefly lived, leaves an indelible mark on the world. He may have been taken from us too soon, a neighbor whispered at one of the remembrance gatherings, but we will carry his light forward in every act of love, in every moment of courage, in every step toward justice. This tragic event reminds us that even the safest communities are not immune to the unexpected, but neither are they powerless to fight back, to seek truth, and to honor those lost.